with me for the step-by-step process of making this warm, cozy flannel shirt by taking apart a shirt that I already have to use as a pattern. I have my shirt all pressed up that I'll be taking apart for my new template. Before I take it apart, I want to make a note of everything that I don't love about the shirt so that I can fix it on the new pattern. So for this particular shirt, it is too short in the torso for me. I'm going to note to add 1.5 inches to the torso. Also, the sleeves are a bit short for me, so I'm going to note to add 1 inch, but I'm noting that now because once I take the shirt apart, it's not really possible to try it back on and say, well, what was wrong with it again? So if I have it in my notes, I'll be good. As we take the shirt apart, we are going to be thinking about the pieces that we need. So we don't need to take the full shirt apart, we just need to get the pattern pieces that we want. So this shirt has a fancy yoke detail on the front. It also has a yoke detail on the back, so we want those two pieces. We want a front piece and a back piece. We want a sleeve. We want the collar stand, the pocket, and the cuff, and that is it. This shirt does not have a bust dart, which is unusual for a lady shirt. Usually lady shirts have a bust dart right about here, and what that does is it helps shape for the bust. So this shirt I know is going to be more about a loose fill. It's not form-fitted, but if you have a bust dart on the shirt that you're taking apart, open that dart up and mark the center. So usually the center would be somewhere like right here. So you mark that with a line, so mark the center of your dart, and then the edges as well. And I can show you what I mean. This is where the pocket was. And this is the bust dart. So I have marked with a dot the very center of that dart, and I have marked the edges. Because what happens is this dart folds up like this when you actually go to sew, and it creates this bubble in the fabric. It makes a much nicer fit. So the orange shirt is more loose fit, doesn't have that bust dart. This is more of a form fit, it does have the dart. And depending on how big the dart is, it might be a big dart depending on the bust size of the shirt. You may actually have a serged line here where the fabric has been cut away because the dart was so big. And if that's the case, not a problem, just open it up to where it would have been and make sure you still mark the stitching line and the center. There is a piece on the sleeve where the sleeve comes together before it comes into the cuff. And if you were looking at it from the right side, it looks something like this. On the shirt, it's this piece here. We could take this piece off and remake it, but there's a shortcut, so we don't have to actually take this off. We'll just remake it when we get to the pattern. All those pieces are now together. We'll go press them, and we will create pattern pieces that we can actually make a shirt from. We are ready to draft the pattern. So I have all the pieces ironed up, and I have this brown paper that I'll be using for the pattern. So the snap placket itself opens up. It's an extendable placket. There's 1 inch behind this for where it folds behind, and then there's another 1/2 inch. So we know 1.5 inches beyond this is where it extends to. So if I set my seam gauge to 1.5 inches, and then I just go along the paper, I can make sure that this is folded out to be exactly where it needs to be. And once it lines up perfectly, I will have my template for cutting. I've also left a room at the bottom of this because I needed to extend the length. Now that that's in place, what I will do is make a little mark up at the top, and then I'm going to make a little mark down here where the bottom of the hem shirt comes to. And then I can go ahead and trace in the rest of the shirt. This is a loose trace, doesn't have to be exact. My straight edges, I will come back and make those straight with the straight edge. Now that I have my lines, true up the edges. Also, now I can add my extra length. So when I add length to the bottom of this piece, I'll be extending it down so it comes a little bit lower for my torso. But I also need to make an adjustment here because as it comes down, it needs to widen out just a little bit more for my hips because right now it's not going all the way down to my hips and I want it to. So whenever you're lengthening or shortening anything, you do it from the waist. This is the side seam, and we see that it curves in and then curves out. The point where it reaches its narrowest point is the natural waist. So on this shirt, that is about here. So that is also going to be where I lengthen or shorten from. So I'll match this up here, and I'm noting my length and shorten line, which will be carried straight across. And now that I have that carried straight across, I'm just going to move the whole shirt down by that 1.5 inches that I want to add. So this is the length and shorten line, and I've moved it down now, so the waist is down here so I can get my actual curve for the bottom piece of this fabric. Now I'm going to trace in the bottom curve for the hem. Next, it did need to widen out just a little bit for my hip. So I could make a straight line between here and here just to see what I need to add, but then I want to curve it so that it follows that natural curve. I have a French curve, and I can find what the curve of this original line was and kind of curve it out, or I can just eyeball it, curve it. And then I'll make it meet up with this curved line here. I'm going to extend my lines from the hem over to the facing and the neck lines as well. Next, we're going to make the neck curves perfect. The armpit has a proper curve also. There is seam allowance still in the shirt. So we know that the seam allowance is taken care of over here because all that's going to be folded underneath. There is seam allowance needed here and on the shoulder seam and on the arm and on the side. And then we need hem allowance down to the bottom. So in patterns, a hem or seam allowance is usually 5/8 in the US. For shirts that have been made and purchased retail, it's usually 1/2 inch. We're going to go with a 1/2 inch hem allowance, and that would be the same for the seam allowance too. At the side, we traced in with the raw edge open, but the raw edge was trimmed. So this is about 1/4 here. So we need to add 1/4 for seam allowance. This is the shirt front. And the grain line goes this way. So when I cut it out, I want this to be parallel to the selvage. So I'm going to do the same thing with the shirt back. Now this is on the fold. I have folded it in half and pressed it at the waist, so that's going to be our length and shorten line. Also, if we compare the front and the back side seams, they should line up perfectly. So remember, we can't compare them like this because this is the back and this is the front. So we have to line them up with their side seams, which are right here, and they should be ending up right at the same, and they are. Now the grain line on the cuff goes a different way. So far, all of the shirt has been going up and down, so this one gets cut this way. So the grain line for the cuff goes like that. And this one we cut 4 because there's a right side and a wrong side, and there's 2 cuffs per shirt. So cut 4, and then cut 2 of interfacing. So the collar we just trace off, and then seam allowances are 1/2 inch, so this is the final seam, so we need to add 1/2 inch to this side, and this side. But this was originally sewn in, so we have 1/4 of it, so we need to add 1/4 up to the top of this. The collar should be a mirror image, so since this was a trace off and not an actual measurement to measurement construction, I'm going to fold it and just make sure that both sides are even, and I'll just trim off the pieces that aren't quite even just to make sure that they're both the same, so that when I end up cutting the shirt, one side of the collar isn't terribly longer or wonky. The collar also cuts with the grain line this way. And we need 2 of fabric, and then we need 1 of interfacing. Now we're going to construct the collar band. Here's the original seam. So we know we have 1/4 inch to add here and here, all the way around the collar band. So we're going to start off by tracing it, and this piece got really thin, so we're just going to carry the idea of what was started down, curved down like that. Next we have the front yoke, and if you remember, this piece overlays the front of the shirt. So if I pull the shirt front over here, I should see that this should match up pretty perfectly right up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another 1/4 inch up here to all of these pieces, but this was already previously folded under, so I'm not going to add any seam allowance to this portion. Now, depending on the type of fabric, you might want this front yoke to be cut out perfectly so that the pattern matches up. If your fabric has stripes, you might turn this on the diagonal so that the front yoke pieces have diagonal stripes, or you might turn it exactly perpendicular so your front yoke pieces are going exactly opposite the stripes on the rest of the shirt. If your pattern has a printed animal print, for example, you might want to position this so that the face of the animal or the animal's upright as opposed to being tilted or upside down. So grain line here is important, but it's more important because of the design. The pocket is really easy because there is no seam allowance needed. It doesn't have a grain line either because depending on your pattern, you may cut it on the diagonal so that you have some sort of difference between the shirt front and the pocket. You can tell. Here's the pocket flap. It has a raw edge here, but there is a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all sides, and it's 1/4 inch because this has already been turned under and it's a pocket flap, so it doesn't have the same seam allowance as the rest of the shirt. So remember, 1/4 inch on the pocket flap. We'll cut 4 of these. There's 2 flaps per pocket, one that faces the outside and one underneath. Now we have the back yoke, and remember the back yoke is very similar to the front yoke, where the only places that we need to add seam allowance are on the shoulders, the neck, and the arms. This back portion already has a seam allowance because it was just folded up, so it was tucked up under there the whole time. But these parts have been trimmed away to make room for the other seams, so we need to add that allowance back in. The back yoke also does not have a specified grain line because depending on the pattern, it might be cut on the diagonal. So the sleeve was short by about 1 inch or 2, so I need to lengthen it. So to find the right lengthening spot, I'm going to go about halfway down the sleeve to about the point where the elbow would be, and that is the spot that you lengthen or shorten. I'm going to mark this spot, and I'm just going to have the sleeve naturally resting in its open state, fabric to rest nice and even there, and then trace around it. This line is super important because this is the continuous lapel that allows the cuff to open wide enough for our arm to fit through. So we want to measure how deep that is, and on this shirt it's 3 inches. It's also about 3 3/4 inches from the side, maybe more like 3 1/2, but with the seam allowance it is closer to 4. So we're going to go 4 inches in from the seam allowance and mark that, and then we're going to go straight up 3 inches. There's also a notch that was cut into the shirt, I can see here, for a pleat. Pleats always fold towards the continuous lapel, and in this case, it looks like there were 2 pleats. And these pleats, based on the creases in the shirt, these are inch pleats. So both of these pleats are 1 inch, which means 1/2 inch was folded under. And I almost forgot to add the 1/4 inch down here of seam allowance, so I'm glad I didn't forget that. Now we need to make the continuous lapel that goes up into the sleeve portion there. So we know the sleeve, the slit was 3 inches, but then we added a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so we're working with 3 1/4 inches. So twice 3 1/4 inches is 6 1/2. So we want our continuous lapel to be 6 1/2 inches tall. For width, it needs to be 1 inch plus seam allowance on both sides. So we're going to go with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side. So it needs to be 1 1/2 inches wide. And the grain line on this is diagonal. So that covers all the pieces. We have a sleeve and the continuous lapel that goes with it. We have the cuff that will go on the end of the sleeve. We have the shirt back, we have the back yoke that will go on the back of the shirt, the collar band and the collar. We have the shirt front, the pocket flap, and the front yoke. So now we can begin to cut out our fabric. We have washed and dried our fabric, and I've got it folded with the right sides together and the selvages matching up. So now we can lay out our pattern. I like to start with a piece that I know is going to need the back. This piece is cut 1 on the fold, so I'm just going to match it up to the fold. And I'm using pins to secure the pattern piece to the fabric. To take advantage of this empty space up here, I can cut the cuffs. You get the 2 cuffs here. I can get the collar band, and I can get the collar. Next, I'm going to get the shirt front. It's nice sometimes to make this piece be diagonal, so it's different than the back facing, but because I don't have enough fabric to do that, I'm just going to cut it out straight. Now I can either cut this like this, or I can fold it in half and cut it on the fold. That'll leave me plenty of room down here for the front yoke, which I might be able to get on the diagonal here, which will change up the front a little bit, make it interesting. Ideally, we would like to get the pockets on the diagonal as well, as that will also add some interest. If we put the pockets there, we can get them on the diagonal. This diagonal is good for the pocket flap as well. Our last piece, which is the continuous lap, also needs to be on the diagonal. Just verifying that I have all my pieces. I have the front and back yoke down there, the 2 sleeves, the shirt front, the continuous lapel, pockets, and the pocket flaps, which I'll end up cutting another piece of those. I have the collar band, the shirt bag, and then the cuff with room for another cuff. So I'm all set. I'm ready to begin cutting. I'm attaching interfacing to the pieces that need it. It is fusible interfacing, so I'm using the heat from the iron to apply the glue to the fabric. I'm attaching interfacing to the wrong side of the fabric. Now I'm transferring the markings from the shirt front pattern over to the shirt front to tell me where to position the pocket. On the sleeve, I'm transferring over my cut mark and my pleat marks. These are not exact, they just give me an idea of where to put those pleats. Continuous lapel line, I need to cut this, and remember it's 3 1/4 inches, it's 4 inches in from the side. All the pieces cut out and organized, interfacing attached to the pieces that need interfacing, we are now ready to start assembling the shirt. The first step is going to be the pockets. So we're going to start with the pocket flaps, and we have 2 together, with the right sides together, and we're going to sew around the pocket flap at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving a spot open up top to turn it. I have sewed around the edge of the pocket flap. Now I'm going to trim off the extras in the corners and also around the seam allowance, because when I turn this right side out, that will make a lot less bulk on this pocket flap seams, and it will just sit a lot nicer. I can turn it right side out. And the corners can be quite difficult to pull out, so you can use a pin to kind of pick the edge of the fabric and make it come to a point at the corners like it ought to. Now I will go press this, tucking in this portion to lie flush with the rest of the top of the pocket. Here are the pressed pocket flaps. If you want them to lay nice and flat always on the shirt, this is the time to do stay stitching. So you won't stay stitch across the top, but you will stay stitch real close to the edge around these 3 sides. The stay stitching has been done on both of these pocket flaps, so now it's time to look at the pocket. I'm going to start by serging the top of the pockets individually, just this top edge, and that will finish the top edge of the pocket. If you don't have a serger, you can use a simple zigzag stitch on your regular sewing machine. With the upper edge of the pocket finished, I'm going to turn down a 1/2 inch on all the remaining raw edges, and then about 1.5 inches on this upper edge. The pockets have been pressed, and now it's time to pin them onto the shirt and get them sewn into place. Here is the shirt front with the markings that we had for where to place the pockets. I'm just going to line the pockets up with those markings, and this was for the pocket flap, so the pocket actually attaches about 1/2 inch below the flap. So I'm using pins to secure this in place, making sure the lines are nice and straight. And now I will go stitch from here up to here, leaving the top open so that it can be a pocket. The pockets are attached, so now it's time to add the flaps. So we have this open spot up here that hasn't been closed up, and what we want to do is just put the pocket flap right on that line, and we're just going to stitch straight across that. With the pockets attached, we're going to turn our attention to the front yoke. So what we need to do is fold under a 1/2 inch on these raw edges. With the piece turned under 1/2 inch, I'm going to go stitch the facing onto the shirt just at the very edge, just along the edges that I've pressed under. So these 3 edges will not have stitching, and I will stitch right here on both shirt fronts. Both of the facings have been attached just at the bottom edge there. Now that the front facings are on, it's time to do the back facings. So this is the shirt back, open it up, and this is the back facing, which will lay right over the shirt back. We need to turn under 1/2 inch on this lower edge. And now, just like we did on the front, we're going to line this up perfectly with the back and stitch the lower edge where we have turned under. Now we're ready to attach the shirt front to the shirt back. So this is the left back, and this is the left front. The snap placket is over on this side. So I'm going to attach them at the shoulder seam, but it's a different type of attachment because there is a facing, and so we're going to completely hide the seam. So to do that, we want the actual shirt, not the facing part, and the actual back. So the actual front and the actual back. And we're actually going to put wrong sides together because on the inside of the shirt, you don't want to see the seam. So we are attaching wrong sides together, and the facings are hanging down on both sides. is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So here's the shirt front to the shirt back seam, and now we need to attach the facings. The facings get to attach right sides together. So instead of attaching this way, we need to twist them so they can be right sides together. You'll have this wonky twist in the fabric, don't worry. Attach those together, 1/2 inch seam allowance. Here's the facing seam, and now turn that all right side out. And we have a shoulder seam that is so pretty on this side and nice and finished on the back side. And inside are the two seams, the raw parts. So we're going to press one seam forward and the other seam backward so that they lay nice and flat when they go together. That seam has been pressed, one forward, one back, and now to keep everything nice and neat and orderly, we're going to do a line of stay stitching on this side and a line of stay stitching on this side on both shoulders. That shoulder seam is finished and it looks so nice. The next step is to attach the shirt front to back at the side seams. These are the side seams. They need to be right sides together, and we're going to attach at the side here on both sides of the shirt. 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to finish that with a serged stitch, or if you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch on your regular machine. The shirt is now attached front to the back of the side seam, and this seam has been pressed towards the back of the shirt. Next, we'll work on the sleeves. This is the continuous lapel where the sleeve opens up at the cuff so that the hand or the arm can fit in a little bit easier. So for the sleeves, we need to attach the continuous lapel to that piece. We have two continuous lapels. The first thing we want to do is to press under about 1/4 inch on one side of each lapel. Now the next thing is to attach this to the sleeve. Using the wrong side of the sleeve, we are going to put the right side of the lapel up against the wrong side of the sleeve. And basically what we're doing is to make it attach in this shape. So we're going to open the sleeve up along this line that we cut, and we will attach the lapel like so. So the stitching line here is 1/4 inch, and when you get to this point where the sleeve has been cut and opened up, you might have to get really close to that. So it might go from 1/4 to 1/8 to back to 1/4. Just make sure the fabric is getting caught in. So the continuous lapel has been attached to that portion of the sleeve, and now what we're going to do is to fold this over so that the pressed line is right over that seam we just made, and give it a nice press, and then we will stitch along the edge of the pressed line to close this lapel. So that is folded over and stitched again, and now I'm folding it to the inside. I'm going to make a vertical stitch right across here to the very corner of the lapel. That's been done, and now you can see when I open it, it has this nice vertical line there, which is going to make it, when you put the shirt together, make it want to stay closed how it should. Next, I am attaching the sleeves together at this sleeve seam. That is the sleeve seam, 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to finish the edges with a serger. The sleeves have been sewn and pressed, and now to tell which sleeve is the right and the left sleeve, which can be tricky to do, you want to have the top completely solid, and the angle when the shoulder seam is nice and high, and the continuous lapel is on the back side. That means it's going to attach like so. So this is the right sleeve. Contrast to the left sleeve, the shoulder portion is nice and high here, and the lapel is on the back. So looking at the shirt, this is the left side of the shirt, and this is the left sleeve. So either I need the sleeve inside out and the shirt right side out, or I need the sleeve right side out and the shirt inside out. So we're just going to take the sleeve seam here and match it up with the side seam here, and then I'm going to flip this portion of the shirt over. So now I have the sleeve hole and the sleeve lining up inside, and I'm just going to pin it around. So I have the sleeve pinned in place, and it's always a good thing to pin it before you sew, because sometimes you have to stretch the shirt quite a bit to fit the sleeve, which I did have to do on this one. But now I can sew it 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I will finish it with a serged stitch. So here's the seam for the sleeve. It's all in nice. There's the side seam to sleeve seam. It looks so good. So now I'm ready to attach the other sleeve in the very same way. Both sleeves have been attached, so now we're going to work on cuffs. We have two cuffs here that have no interfacing on them, and two cuffs that do have interfacing. I'm going to pair them up so that an interfacing cuff has a cuff that doesn't have interfacing. Now on the cuff that doesn't have the interfacing, we're going to turn down on the top straight edge a scant 1/2 inch, and by scant I mean just under 1/2 inch. So do that to both of the cuffs that don't have interfacing. And now on the cuffs that do have the interfacing, we're going to put the right sides together, and we will sew around the curved edge at 1/2 inch seam allowance. We'll do that for both cuffs. Have the cuffs sewn and turned right side out and pressed. So now we're ready to attach them to the shirt. The shirt has the continuous lapel and the seam right here. So on the side that there's a seam there, this part of the shirt lapel stays flat. It doesn't tuck under. So the seam is here and this lapel line is here. So the shortest side of the lapel stays open. So we can begin by pinning the cuff right here. Then on the opposite side, this lapel turns in, and we can pin the cuff there as well. Then we come back over to this side. We're just going to walk along, pinning as we go, keeping everything nice and flat and smooth. And then here is our mark for one pleat, and here's the mark for the other pleat. So this fabric, this extra fabric, needs to get pleated out. So the pleats always fold towards the continuous lapel, which means they're going to need to fold in like this. So I'm attaching one pleat, and then right beside it, I'm going to put the second one. Those two pleats there took out the excess fabric out of the cuff, so now the cuff is going to sew in perfectly. So I'm going to go stitch that at 1/2 inch, so I'll be stitching right up against this line, 1/2 inch all the way around. So this cuff has been sewn in, there's the pleats, and everything is sewed nicely. I didn't catch any fabric that I didn't want in, so now what I'm going to do is trim the seam allowance, and then we can finish the cuff. All the extra bulkiness has been cut out now, and now I can just tip up the cuff and tuck these edges under. And because we only tucked under a scant 1/2 inch, this is fully covering that seam allowance. So we're just going to make sure that gets tucked in all the way across, and we're going to pin it, and now that's ready to sew. So I'm going to sew on the top, right about here, and I'm going to sew all the way across, and then I'm going to stay stitch with the same stitch all the way along the edge. The next step is to finish the snap placket. So we're going to turn under 1/2 inch, and then from this edge, a full inch. So go press that on both sides. So I have this folded over, and now I'm going to stitch along this side right up at the edge, and then I'll do one more row of stitching on the right side right along this edge, and I'll do that on both sides. With the right sides together on the collar, I'm sewing around these edges, leaving the top open, and that's where we'll turn it out. Here's the collar. I turned it right side out, and I've pressed it. And now we're ready to attach it to the shirt. So whenever you're using a new pattern, I like to measure for the collar by using the walk it out method. That's where you take your tape measure and you put it up to the very edge of the snap placket. And we're just going to measure around the shirt collar and walk along like this all the way around the shirt. I've done that for this shirt, and it measures 17¼ inches. And then on the collar band, I measure this long curved edge, and it was 18¼ Because it's exactly an inch longer than the shirt, I know I have my 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides. If it was less than 1/2 inch, I would need to adjust the seam allowances so that the collar band would fit the shirt. And if it was a lot bigger, then I could cut the collar band so I could have just the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I can make adjustments to the collar band when it's still in its raw state, if I know what the shirt measurement is. But in this case, it's going to fit perfectly. So I don't need to make any adjustments to the collar band. What I do need to do is to attach the collar to the band. So with the interfacing side of the collar, which is this side here, this is the side that I want to be on the outside of the shirt when the collar's on. The interfacing side of the collar band is also going to be on the outside of the shirt. So this is the piece with no interfacing. It will fold in like this when it's finished. So in order to attach the collar so that the interfacing side is on the right side of the shirt, I'm going to have the interfacing side of the collar sit on top of the interfacing side of the collar band. And then this piece without interfacing is going to go over the top of that. A couple things that I need to do before attaching the collar. I need to press this up a scant 1/2 inch, the side with no interfacing, on the long curved edge. Next, I'm folding the collar in half to find that middle point, which on the collar it's that red line, so that's super helpful. And on the collar band, I am doing the same thing and finding the top not on the curved side. So it's going to be on the top, which is right there. So I'm taking the collar and lining it up with the middle of the band. I should see an even distance on this side, something that looks about the same on this side. And then I'm going to pin everything in place with this on the very top. Once that's pinned, I will be stitching on the curved side of this all the way down, 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've got it sewed together and I clipped the seam so that the bulkiness is taken out. And I'm going to flip it over, make sure these rounded curves get pressed really nicely, and press the whole collar up from the band. The collar has been attached to the collar band and it has been pressed. So now we're going to attach it to the shirt. We are going to sew the side of the collar band that has the interfacing on it. This is also the side that has not been pressed up. We're going to attach that to the shirt. So with the right sides together, we have the shirt front here, the snap placket, and the collar band, the side with the interfacing. And we are going to pin it here, and then we're also going to pin it around on the other side at the other snap placket. Then the rest of the collar band will pin to this open edge of the neck of the shirt. Now that it has been pinned, I'm going to stitch this at 1/2 inch seam allowance all along this neck edge. I've sewed this at 1/2 inch, and now I'm going to snip away all the extra bulk out of the seam so that we can flip the collar band down and finish off this part of the shirt. Now I can just fold this piece up and under. And this is going to cover it nicely. And we're going to pin it from the right side of the shirt because we'll be sewing it from the right side of the shirt. The facing of the collar band is now pinned in place, so I'm going to sew on the right side of the shirt, starting here and going right along the edge on the collar band all the way across, and then I'm going to go up the side and right alongside the collar for stay stitching to keep the collar and the collar band nice and separate, and it'll make the collar fold down a lot easier. This has been sewn in now and done perfectly. So now the collar's been attached to the shirt. The very last step as far as sewing goes is the hem. So on the hem, I'm going to serge this, just finish off the raw edge, and then I'll be turning it up a 1/2 inch. The hem has been stitched into place now. The last step is to install the snaps and fasteners. So you're going to need snap pliers, snaps and fasteners, and I have Pearl Snaps, a seam gauge, disappearing ink, and pins. And then you get to decide how far apart you want the snaps. For me, I like my snaps 3 inches apart on the placket. So the right side of the lady shirt always folds over the left side. So we know that the fasteners are going to be on the left portion of the shirt and the pearl snaps are going to be on the right. Starting up at the top here, I'm going to mark the center of this area for the snap. That's going to go right there. And then lining up my seam gauge with the top of this seam, I'm going to mark 3 inches. And I'm centering that between the 2 sewing lines on the placket. Then from that snap to the next snap, it's another 3 inches, centering that. And I'm just going to do that all the way down the shirt. At the very bottom here, this is 3 inches, and this is like 3 3/4 inches to the very end. So I'm going to make my last snap be here and just let this piece be the tail. So now I have all my spots marked on the right placket, and now I'm going to line up the top, and I'm using a pin to poke through both plackets right on that first dot that I made for the snap. I'm going straight into the fabric with the pin, and then only turning it once it meets the table. I don't want to go in at an angle, otherwise it's going to mess up where the fastener goes on the left placket. I also should mention that ladies' shirts are exactly opposite from guys' shirts. So if you're making a shirt for a man, you would have these plackets reversed. So the left placket would come over the right placket. With all the pins in place, now we're going to go back on the opposite side where the pins are coming through and mark this on the wrong side of the placket for this panel. And finally, with all of my dots marked on the left placket, I'm going to turn it over and just reinforce those dots with a little stronger marking and make sure that they are lining up at 3 inches, just to make sure that I didn't have the fabric messed up somehow when I poked the pin in, and I roughly want to make sure that they're all in the center as well. And now with both sides marked, I can begin to install the snaps. So the snaps come with a couple different backings. So this is the snap front, it's the pearl, and it has these pokes at the back. And then there's this piece, and this is the piece that directly attaches to the pearl. So there's a piece that has this sharper edge, and there's a piece with a rounded edge. The rounded edge goes directly into the snap, like this. So this piece is going to be under the fabric, this piece will be over the fabric, and they will join up like this. I just line the pearl portion of the snap up over my marking, poke it through the fabric. So now the pokes, I can feel them on this side. Then I line up the snap right with those pokey spots and make sure the bevel portion of my plier is going over the pearl portion of the snap. And then just press it together. It takes a fair amount of pressure to get those to meet. And then just check to make sure that all the pokes are in, and they are. And there is the first snap. So just do that all the way down one side. I like to do all the snaps first and then all the fasteners second. This one didn't go quite lined up correctly, so the pokes are here and here. So this is not set in right, so I need to take this one out. When you buy snaps, you should plan for some extras just in case you meet one that doesn't work out, because that does happen. And there are snaps on that shirt. Now we're ready to attach the fasteners. So the fasteners have this little bubble. That's what goes into the snap to close the shirt. And then they have this ring with spikes, and that's what goes on the back side to go into the fastener to attach it to the fabric. So from the back side, we line up the ring with the mark we've made, press it through to the front side, put the little snap thing over it, and once it's all lined up, the snap plier has a side with a hole in it, and that's the side the snap needs to go into, so that it doesn't become misshapen when you attach it. And then you can test it to make sure it closes, and it does. So with all the snaps now being on the placket, we can go to the pockets. There needs to be one snap on this pocket. I'm going to measure the length of the flap, which is 4 3/4, so half of 4 3/4 is 2 3/8, which will put us right there. So now the snap needs to be on this line somewhere, and I'm going to say maybe right there would look good. Then I'm going to test it out by putting a snap there. And yes, that does look good to me. And with it attached, I can mark for the fastener. And there's the pocket. I'm going to measure up to the center of the snap from the lowest point of the pocket flap, and that looks to be about 5/8. And that is also about 5/8. So now I've got the placement pretty good. Cuffs are the next. So making sure the continuous lapel is folded correctly. I'm just going to fold the cuff over. And we could put 2 snaps or 1. I think I'm going to go with 1 snap on this. The shirt now has all its snaps. For those of you wondering, that was 12 snaps, and I had 2 bad ones. So all in all, 14 snaps. Last thing I like to do is just check to make sure the shirt does in fact snap properly. They're all snapped. They all unsnap nicely. And the shirt is done. And here is the finished shirt. If you remember, the original design had short sleeves and a shorter torso, which I didn't love. So I changed that in the design process before cutting out the fabric and sewing it together. And by making that change, I've been able to achieve that longer sleeve that I was looking for and the longer torso. So now this shirt fits great. It's a super comfortable, relaxed fit. I hope you enjoyed following along with this tutorial as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. If you have other designs that you would like to be a part of, or if you want to see other sewing tutorials, let me know what you're interested in the comments. And if you end up making your own shirt from a pattern that you have that you love and just want to duplicate, or you want to make some changes to a shirt that you have to make it something that you love, don't forget to post pictures of your work in the comments and let me know what you did. I would love to be a part of your process.